Hello and welcome along to Unbelievable with me, Justin Briley. It's the weekly dose of debate and discussion here on Premier Christian Radio as part of Faith Explored. And two very special guests join me to debate an important subject today, and I'll be introducing them in just a moment's time. If you're unfamiliar with the show, then you can get hold of a vast back catalogue of programmes, resources, videos and much more. Subscribe to the podcast and so on at premierchristianradio.com/unbelievable. And thousands of people listen to the podcast every week, as well as listening to us on a Saturday afternoon here on the radio station. You can also hear later on today on Premier The Profile. That's with Gavin and Anne Calver talking to Lucinda van der Hart. They're the theme leaders at next year's, I should say, Spring Harvest 2016. So listen out for their life story. Very interesting story they have to tell between 4 and 5 this Saturday afternoon. But for the moment, we're getting into a debate today on whether Britain's Christian heritage is history. Let me introduce my guests and why we're talking about that today.
You're unbelievable.
Well, recently the Commission on Religion and Public Life, a landmark review into the place of Christianity and other religions in Britain, recommended far-reaching proposals to effectively limit the place of Christianity in public life in the face of declining church-going and an increasingly pluralistic society. Well, joining me to debate that and debate whether Britain's Christian heritage is in fact history, Peter Hitchens joins me, columnist for the Mail on Sunday, and he wrote a critical response to that report in his most recent column. Terry Sanderson also here in the studio of the National Secular Society, and we'll be hearing his take on it, whether he supports those proposals, whether he thinks that some of them need to go further even. And we're going to be talking about some of the proposals made, and we'll get to that in the course of the programme. Look forward to hearing what you have to say on this subject as well, as we get into the debate here on the show that aims to get you thinking unbelievable. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much both for joining me. It's very exciting to have you both in studio. It's been a little while since you were last on, Peter, and I've had various calls for your return from various show listeners because they enjoy your contributions. Terry, you're also a familiar voice, though usually joining us via an ISDN line from your offices at the National Secular Society, but good to have you in person.
Thank you.
Here as well. Shall we just talk first of all about this Commission on Religion and Public Life? I don't think either of you were involved in this panel that they brought together. I know the British Humanist Association were involved, though, Terry, but you decided not to get involved at the National Secular Society?
Yeah, we decided in the early days that we wouldn't cooperate with it because we saw that what the panel was composed of, and it was almost entirely composed of vested interests coming from a religious perspective, lots of rabbis and archbishops and bishops and priests, and so we decided that it wasn't going to come to a conclusion that was going to be independent and objective. So we decided not to take part.
Okay, that's interesting. Peter, we'll talk about some of the proposals that have come out of this. You were pretty scathing, though, in your response to it.
What Terry says is very funny. But the idea that rabbis and bishops and priests are going to be keen on keeping the Christian religion established in Britain is a rather fanciful notion. They're precisely the people least likely, it seems to me, to want to do so. If you want to find people who really are reluctant to defend Christianity as a living faith in this country, turn to the established churches and you'll find the weakest defenders, if defenders is the word, of the idea that you possibly can. You should have been on it. You'd have been among friends.
In any case, the way you introduced your column for the Mail on Sunday this last week was, if you want to wreck the country, get some grandiose people to sit on a panel. Make sure you don't choose anyone who disagrees with your aim. Then write a pamphlet demanding the destruction of something good and call it a report. The latest example is from the self-proclaimed Commission on Religion and Belief in British Public Life, whose demands were published last week, masquerading as the conclusions of a balanced study.
Well, exactly. Anybody can set up one of these things. I could set one up. It wouldn't get the same treatment, particularly from the BBC and the left-wing media, that this sort of stuff gets. But anybody can call himself a commission, and there's nothing to stop you. And there's a particular example of this, something I've been studying over the past few years. The drug laws of this country are constantly being examined by commissions composed of people who are selected in advance to come up with the correct conclusion, i.e. stop bothering to do anything about it. And lo and behold, when they report, that's what they say you should do. If you wanted to have a serious discussion on this subject and set up a proper royal commission in which all points of view were actually represented, you wouldn't have come up with the same result, because there are many people in this country who still seriously believe that the Christian religion informs our government, our law, our culture, absolutely everything about it, and should be defended. It's absolutely beyond doubt that it's weaker than it was. Who can possibly contest that? It's a given. But should you respond to that by saying, okay, goodbye, it was nice knowing you, and let it go? Or should you respond to it by saying, well, actually, it did a lot of good, let's try and save it? And I don't think there was anybody that I could see on the Commission who took the second attitude.
Right. Do you think the report was a foregone conclusion given the committee, Terry?
Yes, that's why we didn't take part in it. As Peter says, they were self-appointed, and we thought that the conclusion was...
So in a sense, there's a measure of agreement between you both on that at least, though I suspect difference of opinion on the actual outcomes.
I think that Peter is wrong to say that these people would support disestablishment of the Church of England. If actually the report is quite conservative when you read it. It tinkers around the edges, but it doesn't actually make any profound suggestions or radical recommendations about changing the way this country is structured.
Can I give some examples of what in broad terms, it has recommended? It suggests 10 Anglican bishops be removed from the House of Lords to make room for other faiths, scrapping compulsory Christian worship in schools, reducing the number of school admissions based on a child's faith or religious background, making national events more inclusive of other faiths, for example, the coronation, making religious programming more representative of British society, including other religions, atheists on thought of the day, that kind of thing. Religious education to be compulsory in all schools, and for this to reflect other religions and humanism and atheism better, and promoting better understanding of all religions in the media and wider society. Now, I would have thought that a lot of those you would go along with.
Yeah,
Terry.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that this society has changed beyond all recognition in the last 20 years. We can't ignore that. We can't pretend that it hasn't happened or try to reinstate the past in some way. We've got to accept that, we live in a very diverse society now, and it's becoming more diverse by the day. We've got to accept that and accommodate it. And this Commission did go a little way towards that, but not as far as I would have liked.
So you would have liked to see a full-on disestablishment being recommended?
I mean, that is
the
obviously what the National Secular
Yeah.
Society's main aim is,
Yeah.
and has been since 1866, is to disestablish the Church of England. But now I think it's become a really pragmatic issue, in the sense that you can't have a small denomination of one religion with these special privileges and constitutional rights that are denied to everybody else.
Okay, it doesn't go far enough, says Terry. What's your take on these proposals, Peter?
Well, I think to concentrate on the technical fact of disestablishment is to miss the point. That every major change in a society like ours isn't achieved by going full frontally at what you want to destroy. You go round the side and you slice away at it by salami slices until it's gone. Disestablishment will happen, not probably by an act of Parliament, but by the Church of England simply ceasing to be disestablished in reality. In many ways, the Equality Act pretty much did for that anyway. You can't now insist on the primacy of Christianity in any public sector or occupation or employment or anywhere that actually does any business with the public sector. So effectively, the Equality Act disestablished the Church of England anyway.
Right.
That's happened. Mm-hmm. The question is also whether this is a good thing or not. Now, I'd like to hear Terry's argument as to why we should abandon the moral principles and system which have upheld our entire political system, our cultural life, our music, our architecture, our landscape, our language, everything that we do for 1,000 years, and which have created a uniquely free and ordered society. If he thinks he's got a better idea that he wants to put in its place, let me know. But quite honestly, if all you want to do is to destroy it, then you should also set yourself out as saying, we just want to destroy something. If you have a new idea, if you say freedom and order combined in a society believing in Christianity are a bad thing, we want to get rid of it, then let's hear what your alternative is, please. Is it Mao's China, Soviet Union, or some other paradise which we haven't yet experienced that's built on some other idea? Please let us know.
Well, we'll come to Terry's response to that. I mean, do you agree with, this was the way Paul Vallely wrote about it in the Church Times, He said, although it calls itself a commission, a word with official overtones, this self-appointed group has produced an ideological document that assumes from the outset that liberal humanism is the only sensible option in a diversifying society. And he goes on to give a sort of roundup of how many times the British Humanist Association are quoted. 10 times, National Secular Society 5, even the Humanist Society of Scotland gets 3 mentions. In contrast, there's a single quotation from an Anglican Archbishop's Commission and a solitary reference to a report by the National Roman Catholics Bishops. Humanists are crammed in, even in the most unrepresentative context. So he's saying it's saying we're not going to have Christianity, we're going to replace it with humanism. It sounds like from that point of view. Is that what you see is happening here, Peter, before Terry responds?
Well, I think it's time Terry had a go, but yes, I think it is. There is clearly an agenda here to push Christianity aside and replace it with something else. The question of what that something else is seems to me to be the most fascinating one.
Well, secularism in its proper form would allow everybody to be included. Everybody who lives here could be included under a secular arrangement in our constitution. It doesn't mean to say you're going to destroy Christianity. Christianity will be there for those people who want it. And, lots of people do want it. Good luck to them. But what we can't do is say that people from other faiths, or these huge numbers of people who don't have a faith, have no role in our society, or they've got an inferior role. That can't be right in a democracy. So I think we do need to look at secularism as a construct to order things now in our changed society. And we've seen it happening in America and in France, where they do have secularism written into the constitutions, and it's working pretty well for them. Although, it hasn't destroyed Christianity, it hasn't pushed Christianity aside in America, by no means. And in France, Christianity operates quite well for those people who want it. They're struggling now with Islam, but I think sticking to their principle of secularism, they will make sure that nobody overwhelms the state and says we're in charge. No religion will do that, and I think that's the danger when you allow religion to have political power.
Secularism is an absence. It's not an actual positive thing. It's an absence.
It's
the other
not
thing is that
a moral. It's not a moral structure.
Christianity in a society is not just a series of people holding a private faith. It's a society basing itself on an agreement that these are the foundations of our moral law, and therefore of our criminal law, of our civil law, of all our behaviour.
That can't work anymore.
Well, you say it can't work anymore. I say it could. You assert that as saying it can't work. It has worked. It has been successful. What you're saying is that because it is failing, because for many reasons it has failed to reinforce itself and establish itself in the younger generations and is weak, let's take the opportunity to get rid of it. I say that if you say that, what you must explain is what you propose to put in its place, and you don't.
Well, I haven't for one moment said that we're going to destroy and shove aside Christianity.
No, it would be a very silly thing to say, because it would annoy people.
Of course
it would alert people to what you're doing. But the fact is that is what you want to see. You want to see Christianity pushed to the margins of a formerly Christian society, deprived of its influence over state and law, and turned into a private peculiarity which is tolerated but has no power over thought or morals.
Certainly that. I think we've seen already the way that Christian morality has been expunged from the law, and I think properly in areas like abortion, homosexuality, things like that, where the laws were made on Christian principles, now seem to be very unfair and unjust and have been dispensed with. Christianity can't make a legal system any more than Islam can make a legal system that is just and fair to everybody. We've got to make the law according to the facts, not according to some preordained theology. And I think it's very important that we don't do that. We don't allow the law to be made by priests and bishops or imams or rabbis, that it's made on the basis of the facts.
Well, facts are it is, they're not an ought. We're all faced with the facts that if people misbehave in certain ways, then we're all damaged and often threatened. Therefore, we have to find some way to decide how to make people behave better when they won't, and how to influence them into behaving well. But before we do that, we have to decide what we think is good and what we think is bad. And that is what I'm interested to know, what you actually think is good and what you think is bad. I don't actually accept that the laws against homosexuality, which existed for actually rather a short period in this time, in the modern era, were based upon Christian thought. The laws on abortion certainly were, and the Christian prohibition on infanticide and abortion was a huge change in human civilization, and one which has been reversed in an amazingly short time. The laws on marriage and the general conduct of marriage and of private life seem to me to be the really huge area in which things have changed. But in general, the idea that people should restrain themselves by a moral system which they believe in, rather than have to be restrained by the law and a strong state, is the fundamental disagreement between me and you. You seem to want and prefer the idea of a strong state forcing people to behave as you think they should, rather than a moral system
than the way you think
persuading people to behave as the Christian religion says they should.
Well, this is the point, isn't it? We're not all Christian. And we don't all agree with some elements of Christian morality. That there are some things that are common sense. You don't kill each other, you don't rob from each other, and that kind of thing. It's common sense. But there are some areas where there is dispute, such as...
Hang on a minute, you said you don't kill each other, but you're in favour of abortion, which in my view is killing people.
Well,
you're in favour of killing people
that's a whole different argument.
Under certain circumstances.
That's a whole different argument.
I've no doubt you're also in favour of high levels of taxation, which some people regard as state confiscation of private property. Actually, as it happens, all these things about morality are actually much more profound than you're prepared to
well, you're
admit.
ascribing an awful lot of stuff.
The origins of many of the things which you define as good, though you pick and choose them, are actually Christian origins rather than
you don't know what I think of as good.
We'll wait and see about that, shall we?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is an innate morality in people, that you don't need to impose morality on people. You've got the law, and that will keep people in line. And the law has to be made according to the circumstances of the time.
If it's innate, why do you need the law?
Because people misbehave.
But
we know that.
What does innate mean then?
It means you have it within you.
But where does it come from? What's the origin of it?
It is innate. It has evolved over millennia.
By what process?
By sheer need of us as a pack animal to live together. We can't, we live in huge...
Why doesn't it exist in so many societies? Why can you walk through the streets of Bombay and see tiny children begging?
Well, that's because of poverty, isn't it? It's nothing to do with morality.
Is your point, Peter, that we didn't arrive at a democratic society of the type that we've enjoyed in this country by simply letting people's innate desires flourish? It was because it was guided and directed by specifically Christian principles.
It's very much my point, yes. And you only need to travel around the world, which I have done, and see other societies to see how very rare the sort of society which we have is. The other sort of society in which might is right and the unfortunate are scorned is much more common than what we have, and also the kind of society in which people have to be forced into behaving as the state wished them to do, rather than decide to behave as they should do according to a moral system, is also very common.
I've heard this from many other people apart from Peter, Terry, which is that it's all very well to ride on the coattails of Christian societies and the values that they've established, and then say, well, let's make it secular and we'll all be happy.
Well, let's go back to Tudor times and look at Christian morality in those days, when it was more or less a theocracy. I don't think I would have liked to have lived in those times. There was nothing moral about the behaviour of the church in those days, and they were not democratic. Democracy had to be forced on them, and by other people outside the church. And I think that's very important, that we don't ascribe everything that's good to the church and everything that's bad to everybody else. The church has made a lot of errors in its time, and it's been very cruel. And I think, try to eradicate that history and say everything that's good has come from our society has come from the church is rubbish.
So Peter's got a rose-tinted view of the role of Christianity
I
in the
didn't
church.
say from the church, and this is a common confusion. I said from the Christian religion. The church is a human institution which is plagued by all the problems that human institutions are invariably plagued with: the selfishness, the desire for power, which is innate in us for certain, and which has to be combated, in my view, by conscience, which, though innate, if not confirmed by some sort of external morality which we can't change according to our own desires, will not develop. And unless that conscience is strong, then you will find the other things triumphing. But you cite the Elizabethan era. Yes, of course. By comparison with now, it was extremely severe and sometimes savage. But then again, compare the kind of society which we had created by the 16th and 17th centuries in this country by what happened on the continent during the 30 Years' War, and you will find that we were immensely more restrained by the form of the Christian religion which we had by that time adopted than they were during the 30 Years' War. It's just demonstrably true that it was different here because of the particular form of the Christian religion.
Is what you're saying, Terry, and you can disagree with this, this may not be at all what you're saying, but that if Christianity hadn't been around and we had sort of been, had a sort of secular humanist kind of view of life from the year zero, let's say, to the present day, we'd be a far more advanced, more tolerant, more fruitful society than we are now. Christianity, in effect, held us back from doing that in the Dark Ages. I don't know.
I couldn't say. That's all very theoretical, and I have no idea what might have happened if things had been different. But certainly, at some stages in its history, Christianity has been regressive and has held society back. It has contributed, obviously, to the culture of this country. There's no getting away from that, and I wouldn't try to take that away.
In what ways has it contributed? Because I'd be interested to hear the positive case at one level from you.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that it produced some great art, although it's arguable whether that was because it had the money to do that. It helped develop music. It helped with other cultural developments, but in other ways, it held people back. It was cruel and it was unjust, and I think that you need to look.
There
at
are
the whole
those who
picture.
say, you look education, health, and many other things were founded in the Christian culture.
They were, but they were developed outside of it, and the society we've got now, I think, is probably the most moral that it's ever been in its history, in our history. I think that we are now more concerned for each other. We have a wonderful health service and social services. Admittedly, they're under threat now, but I think we've created those things outside of the church.
So you think those are independent of what Christianity is allowed to flourish in the
Christianity helped set the foundations, but they've been developed outside of Christianity. They're now secular institutions, and I think that is a great thing. When you look at what happens in America, where you've got the Catholic Church in charge of hospitals, where they turn people away because they're not sufficiently in line with the Catholic ethos, then I think that's when you realise that it's good not to have Christian hospitals.
Let's talk. What's your take on?
I was slightly baffled by the last claim, but anyway, I'm interested in on what basis Terry is saying that these things are good. Why does he think that unselfishness is good in the first place?
That unselfishness.
Yeah, why does he think the unselfishness, concern for your fellow creature, is a good thing in the first place? On what basis are you making that assertion?
As I said, it's an innate characteristic. You have.
Well, it plainly isn't. You only need
is.
to travel to large parts of the world where it isn't the case. It's not innate. It's absent from huge numbers of societies, and it simply isn't there.
But that's probably because of poverty and a lack of opportunity. I mean, if you go to these
shouldn't poverty be the origin of the impulse to selflessness and compassion?
People want to be selfless, but if you're starving, it's very difficult.
It seems like I don't know. I mean, I have to confess myself, Terry, that I find that an optimistic view of human nature.
It is, and I don't see what's wrong with that. Selfless. I find yours very pessimistic. I find Peter's approach to life pessimistic in the extreme. You know, he seems to think that everything's falling apart. Well, I don't. I think that things have never been stronger.
People naturally want to behave well.
They do. And, you know, when you get 65 million people crammed onto a tiny island, there are bound to be malcontents and people who behave in an antisocial way. You can't stop that. It's bound to happen.
Right. I mean, Peter, you're saying that's just not the way you see it historically, socially, and globally.
Well, I think that's demonstrable. But I think my point here is that secularists and humanists are borrowing Christian concepts of goodness, and in fact they exist purely on the surface of what you might call the Christian notion of moral thought. And they wouldn't exist if Christianity hadn't, first of all, shouldered aside the...
So there was no morality before Christianity?
No, there was morality, but it was a different sort of morality. You examine the morality of ancient Greece, for instance, or of the pagan countries where Christianity hasn't succeeded, or in almost any pre-Christian society. It's different from Christian morality. What secular humanism tends to do is to borrow the principles, particularly of the Sermon of the Mount, and say these are things which are admirable, and then claim that they can be achieved without the religion which made them a strong force in our society. I think that's a fallacy, and I think that it's demonstrably untrue, and you can just examine societies both in the past, of which we have historical record, and societies existing in the present or the recent past, where it has not been the case.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll come back for more discussion on this. We're talking about the recently released Commission on Religion and Public Life. Their report looked at the place of Christianity and other religions in Britain and has recommended far-reaching proposals to limit the place of the Christian faith in public life in Britain. If you'd like to get in touch with us about this topic, be interested in your perspective as well, you can email in unbelievable@premier.org.uk. Don't forget that the Facebook and Twitter accounts are always there as well for you to interact with. Facebook.com/unbelievablejb, @unbelievablejb to follow me on Twitter and leave me a comment that way. And of course, today's programme available online as we speak. And if you'd like to leave a comment there, that's also possible. All of those links and more available from premierchristianradio.com/unbelievable. Today we're debating, is Britain's Christian heritage history? And my guests in the studio, Peter Hitchens and Terry Sanderson. I'm Justin Briley with the show that aims to get you thinking unbelievable. May the Force be with you, and also with you. As the new Star Wars film blasts off, Premier Christianity magazine brings you the definitive Christian guide to the incredibly popular film series. Plus, we visit Bethel in Redding, California, and find out why many say heaven is coming on earth at Bill Johnson's Church for Continuous Revival, while others claim it's a dangerous deception. Also, discover what craftivism is, 6 things the Bible doesn't say about money, and much more. Sounds interesting? Request your free copy at premierchristianity.com/free sample.
You're listening to Unbelievable on Premier Christian Radio.
And I'm Justin Briley, your host for the programme that helps to get you thinking. And today we're asking, is Britain's Christian heritage history? Joined in studio by Peter Hitchens and Terry Sanderson. Peter, a columnist for the Mail on Sunday, and Terry from the National Secular Society. And I'll remind you of the reason we're debating that subject in a moment's time. Later on today, between 4 and 5, you can hear the profile. Gavin and Anne Calver talk to Lucinda van der Hart. They're theme leaders at Spring Harvest 2016. And I'll be telling you a little bit later what's coming up next week on Unbelievable, as well as hearing some of your feedback. With Christmas approaching, we've got a special Christmas-themed edition of the programme next week. If you want to get in touch with today's show, unbelievable@premier.org.uk is the way to do that. Enjoy receiving your emails and read as many of them as I can each week at the end of the show. Also, the ways to get in touch are given you already via Facebook, Twitter and so on, but all the links and more available, as well as today's show, at the website premierchristianradio.com/unbelievable. So why are we asking whether Britain's Christian heritage is history? Well, it's because of this recent Commission on Religion and Public Life, which recommended a number of far-reaching proposals to limit the place of Christianity in public life. Well, both my guests, Peter and Terry, have been sceptical as to whether the what made up the panel was actually representative and were going to effectively not come to the conclusions that were eventually given on that. But it would be good to touch on some of the actual proposals as well. There has been a lot of criticism of this from certainly the Christian press that I've been reading. For instance, Dr. Jenny Taylor from Lepido Media said this report merely continues the half-century-long war of attrition against the Christian character of the country by effectively saying that the public space is pluralist. It further privatises any one expression of faith as true, and the report makes no attempt to acknowledge or appreciate the debt the nation's public life owes to Christianity. So very much in tune with what Peter's been saying there, Terry. Is that a fair criticism of the report as far as you're concerned?
No, I don't think so. I think that it's just trying to be realistic and trying to address the nation as it is at the moment rather than as it was in the 1950s. We've got to get to grips with the fact that we have huge numbers of people in this country who are not Christians. Either they're other faiths or they don't have a faith at all. And you can't just exclude them and say, we've got a Christian heritage and therefore there's no place for you.
Is it saying there's no place for you? I mean, to say we value our Christian heritage and we potentially, from what I'm hearing from what Peter says, run a risk of simply binning it and saying that's no longer relevant to us. Is that the same as saying there's no place for you if you're an atheist, an unbeliever, or whatever?
Well, sometimes it feels like that. That there's certain privileges that Christians have in this country that you think, well, why have they got them when everybody else has denied them? For instance, they get preferential admission to faith schools, and you might say, why would anybody who wasn't a Christian want to go to a Christian faith school? Well, sometimes there's no choice. If you're in a rural area where there's only one school and it's Christian, you've got no choice. And I think, there shouldn't be entry requirements.
Well, if there's only one school, everybody gets in, don't they?
Not necessarily. Sometimes you have to produce a letter from the vicar saying you've been to church for a year or even 2 years before you make the application, and this kind of thing.
In places where there's only one school.
Yeah, and if you
if you haven't got a letter from the vicar, the school says you can't come to school.
Well, if there are too many children applying and there aren't enough places.
I don't think you'll find that happens in places where there's only one school. Well,
children have to be bused long distances to get to another school. We've seen this. We get complaints all the time at the National Secular Society from parents who cannot get their children into the local school because it's full of Christians who've been bussed in from miles away.
I mean, at the same time, obviously, you obviously favour the scrapping faith schools altogether at the National Secular Society. I hear from a lot of people who say if you look at the performance of Church of England schools, you see that it obviously has a value because of the results they get, because of the because of the Christian ethos that exists.
No, because of the selection.
You think it's just about selection?
It is about the selection. They can pick and choose, and they're not supposed to do it, but they can pick and choose the parents who are going to support their children best, who are going to help them to achieve better in the school. That they go up the league tables and everybody wants to get into them.
What do you think of the recommendations the report makes on faith schools?
I think they ignore the fact, which is unknown to some people and forgotten by others, that a large part of the state school system in this country was actually founded by the churches because the state couldn't be bothered. And the development of education for the poor in this country was largely achieved by the churches. And that's why the churches have such a large role in state education. The other point is that a treaty was signed between the church and the government in 1944 in the Education Act. At a point, I have to say, when the Church of England believed pretty much that the Attlee government was about to bring the kingdom of heaven to Britain, and they really did think that all the things it was going to do were what they'd longed for. They handed over an awful lot of control, particularly over secondary schools, to the state in return for a promise that there would be a daily act of Christian worship, a promise which has been systematically broken ever since and is now almost universally broken. I know people who go into our state schools at Christmas time and Easter time to try and explain to children the absolute basics of the Christian religion. They know nothing of the founding philosophy of our society. To me, that's as disastrous as them not being able to read or write or do basic arithmetic. To know nothing of the ideas on which your society is founded, never to have heard of the Good Samaritan, never to have heard of the prodigal son, not to know the Christmas and Easter stories. They've been robbed of an important privilege. And the idea that somehow or other the schools are or a machine for inculcating Christianity into unwilling children of secular parents is nonsense. It's the reverse of the truth.
I mean, to be fair to the report, though, they do encourage Christianity and all religions to be better taught in schools.
Yeah, but taught as an anthropological peculiarity, something other people do that we can examine on the table. It's the difference between autopsy and an operation. They're looking at it as a dead thing to be examined, not as a live thing to be taught as a faith.
Right.
But then you've got people living in this country who are from Islam and Hinduism and Judaism. Maybe their life should be understood too, and their heritage. And maybe children from Christian backgrounds should also know their history, because they're going to have to live with them in this new world.
What's interesting...
More than happy for that to happen, but not at the expense of Christianity being taught as a living faith.
It's interesting to me, though, as a parent who does have children at a Church of England school, there are a large number of Muslims who also go to the school. Their parents, whenever I speak to them, are very happy for them to be at a Christian school, teaching Christian doctrine effectively to the children. I sometimes wonder whether the problem that many people have with faith schools is more a secularist, humanist problem than actually with people of other faiths. I often find actually people of other faiths are quite happy to send their children to a school where they know they'll get a good education.
We have to separate humanism from secularism, because secularism is just a political construct.
Okay.
Humanism is a sort of almost a theology, and I think that you're right that a lot of Muslim parents are quite happy for their kids to go to a Christian school. But if there was a Muslim school available, they'd be even happier for them to go there. And I think, we're seeing now the problems of creating minority religious schools. You can't deny people from other religions their own schools while Christians have their schools.
Nor should you, but that shouldn't be used as a pretext for attacking Christianity where it already exists. I'm all in favour of if people want to have Muslim state schools, if people want to have atheist state schools, that's fine by me. Let 100 flowers bloom. I don't mind. But to use this as an excuse to attack existing Christianity in schools is something entirely different.
Do I get the impression, Peter, that your view is that if you effectively say, well, let's make the playing field fair and we won't have any religion, as it were, represented as the ethos in the school, you're actually simply saying, therefore secularism becomes the de facto...
Yes, the place becomes a howling wilderness in which nobody is actually talking in any profound
there are an awful lot of...
Multiculturalism is actually not, is nothing culturalism. It means that nobody is taught to believe in anything fundamentally at all. Everything just competes in a swirling mess where nothing is said to be right or wrong. And what child trying to puzzle out what this means will come out with any other impression than that none of these people believes in anything, so why should I?
Well, I'm in agreement about multiculturalism. It's failed dismally, and we have got ourselves into a right mess over it. Nobody knows what they can say, where they can go, what they can do without offending somebody else, and that is a problem. But there is a way round it, and that is to take religion out of all schools. And to a religious ethos, I should say, not religion. People need to know about religion. It's such a big issue in the world now.
Is it like Peter says, though, it turns it into a sort of autopsy of a dead thing?
Rubbish. I mean, what you've got now is a lot of state schools that do not have a religious ethos. They still have to have an element of religion. Religious education still mandatory, and the daily act of worship when it happens is also,
which it doesn't.
Well, not in a lot of schools. It is supposed to be a legal requirement, though.
But it's not enforced.
No, it's not. That's right. And because it's not enforced, maybe it's time to do away with it.
Or maybe it's time to enforce it. These are two different views. This is the whole point. Here we are.
And this is what frightens me.
We find, as I say, if we find that no one can read and no one can write, then we say, right, let's do something about it. Let's make the schools teach children to read and write properly. If we find that nobody understands the founding principle and moral philosophy of the society in which they live, we say, okay, let's get rid of it entirely so they know even less. It's not actually a logical response to a problem. If you have an idea as to what people should be taught instead, say what it is. If you haven't, then surely you ought to be defending the thing which has brought us to the extraordinary level of civilization which we both agree we've reached in this country.
Yeah, I don't think Christianity is entirely responsible for our civilization.
But I think it's largely
And I think that we've got to move on. We've got to accept that things have changed. We can't live in the past. And I'm a little bit frightened about your ideas about, let's revive Christianity. How are you going to do this without some kind of force? Because at the moment, this country is indifferent to all religion.
You propose to use the force of the law to drive it out of the schools. I propose to use the force of the law to make sure that it is properly taught in schools as a living faith. Both of us ultimately rely on the force of the law for what we desire. That's why we argue in public, so that in the hope that Parliament will adopt the ideas which we have. You just talk about living in the past. I have no interest in living in the past. The past is dead and gone. What I'm worried about is the future that you want us to live in. As I say, this howling wilderness of amorality where nobody believes in anything, and we're all just
nonsense.
Individuals governed by nothing except
Absolute
our own
nonsense.
desires and a mythical innate desire to be good.
This is a complete invention. I don't know
It's what you've said.
I don't know what world you live in, but I don't see this chaos all around me. Even though the fact that the majority of the people in this country have no interest whatsoever in religion. They don't go to church. They don't think about religion. It doesn't affect them in any way whatsoever. And I saw a survey recently where that people were asked who they would go to for advice if they were in trouble. And right at the very bottom was the priest, with about 2% of people. So, people do not look to religion for their moral guidance anymore. But they're not amoral.
But the question is, should they? The question is whether they're immoral. I don't know how much you visit your own country, but if you visit the rougher parts of the bigger cities of this country, you do indeed see a howling wilderness in which a lot of people live in fear of their neighbours, and life is pretty miserable. And just to say they don't ask the priest, they don't ask the church, undoubtedly that's true, but that's not the question, and isn't necessarily an ought. My point is, if it would be better. It would be better for these people, it would be better especially for the poor of this country, if there were more morality rather than less.
How are you going to enforce that?
I'm going to enforce it is by using the instruments which the government of a free society gives us, that is, the schools, to propagate the religion which I believe has made us as civilized as we are, rather than to let it die, and to imagine that once it's dead, we'll continue to live in the same civilized fashion that we do now. Well, that's the mistake you make, to think that after it's gone, everything will be just the same as it was when it was here.
It will. It will be
better.
It could well be better. I think we've reached the stage in our development now, our evolution, where we've outgrown religion in many ways. I think that you find that people are indifferent to it, but also that they live perfectly moral lives. They look after their families, they look after their children, and they love their children, and they look after their neighbours in many instances. All right, so a lot of things are breaking down in the big cities, that kind of community, but this happens all over the world. You can't live in great vast communities and expect them.
It's full of ghastly homes in which the old are dumped. It's full of abortion.
I know.
It's full of abortion mills in which unborn babies are killed for the convenience of parents. It's full of broken families in which the children.
It was ever
in
so.
which the children's welfare.
It was
has,
ever
in
so.
which the children's welfare has been sacrificed for the selfish desires of their parents. It's full of people who are horrible to their neighbours in the most direct possible way. I don't think that you can really be quite so complacent about it if you ever visit it. It isn't like that. It's not very nice at the moment. It's getting worse.
I come from Rotherham, and I go back there quite frequently, and I can tell you that even in Rotherham, with its terrible reputation and the dreadful things that have happened there, that people still take care of each other, and there is a community feeling that goes beyond all this awfulness.
It's often argued by Christians and churches that you do need something like the church to enable that kind of community.
Well, people don't, obviously. They don't go to church. They don't look to the church. Yet they have community.
Well, there's still obviously there's been an overall decline in church going. I think there's been something of an upturn in urban centres, as it happens.
Minute.
But there's a sense in which I suppose my question is, how do you deliver the community and those goods, if you like?
Why do they have to be delivered? Why can't they be what they are? And why can't people create their own communities in the way that they want them? Why do they have to have them dictated? In days gone by, when we were a rural country, people needed the churches as a focus.
Mm-hmm.
And they would go there and they would find their community there. And that's where they would spread their gossip and find out what was going on in the area. That was good.
What are the places now then that you think provide that kind of social cohesion, the ability to learn to love your neighbour? If it's not,
I mean, when you're actually coming together, you do have things like football matches and pubs and bingo halls, which, although we might decry them, are actually very important to some people as social focuses. We have dancing groups and community groups of all kinds where people get together. And I think, you don't need to have the church saying, we will bring you together.
So we've got those places where people now congregate, where these are the places where we find community, not the church. We don't need that kind of establishment to deliver the goods that it once did.
Well, two different statements, aren't they? One is this is what's going on. The other is that we don't need the church which has gone missing. I would say that we now have in our society, probably still living, working in positions of power, influence and authority, the last generation of British people who were profoundly influenced by the Christian faith. Mm-hmm. And when they've gone, they won't be replaced by others who have the same influence. They will be replaced by people who are ignorant of it, who don't know
what difference will that make in.
I think it will make I think I always compare this to the afterglow. When the sun sets, there is a period of perhaps half an hour or so during which there's still enough light to see by. We're in that period now. The sun has set.
We're still feeling the effects.
Absolutely,
the
after effects of 1,000 years of continuous Christian practice and belief are still felt in everything we do, but it's not to be relied upon. It will go because those people who understood it, those people who lived by it, are dying, and they will not be replaced by others who feel the same way. And that's when we'll get the test of whether
why are you so sure that it will be a grim prognosis?
Because I think what is missing has been the principal impulse for people to obey conscience and to follow the good as understood by the Christian religion, and as, in my belief, as stated as being good by God himself when he was walking on earth 2,000 years ago, that we have. Once that's gone, then people will be left with their own devices, and the own devices of the human race, uninfluenced by such forces, are actually often pretty grim, and demonstrably so. I saw the final years of the Soviet Union. It's simple things. Really simple things, like holding doors open for people behind you on the tube. Really heavy winter doors to keep out the free. People looked at me in amazement when I did this, because they thought I was tricking them, because they'd never seen anybody hold the door open for anybody. All these basic impulses of unselfishness had been wiped out of society by 70 years of vigorous promotion of actual atheism. And the cynicism towards belief in God and towards the message of the Sermon on the Mount, to be found in educated Russian people, and it's still to be found in those of my age, was tremendous. It's just an absolute absence of things which you take for granted here. When they're gone, you'll be interested to see what it's like not to have them there. The absence of things which you're used to can come as a bit of a shock, and one of the things I think that secularists and humanists want to do is to ride free on the achievements of Christianity without in any way being prepared to actually conform to its precepts.
I don't see how secularism destroys Christianity. It just simply says that Christianity takes its place amongst a plethora of other religions. And that's all. It doesn't say, and we're going to crush you and close your churches and stand outside and beat you up if you try to go in.
It doesn't say that now, no, but when it's in its pomp, it does. The de-Christianization of France by the French Revolutionaries, a deliberate act. They knew what the enemy was. They went into the churches. They made prostitutes dance on the altars. They desecrated and destroyed them, and deliberately made sure that their spiritual impact on the French people was destroyed, an effect which I have to say still probably persists in France to this day. The attitude of the Soviet Union during its early years towards Christianity was again one of deliberate, systematic enmity and destruction, persecution and theft and destruction. The lovely Moscow metro, which people go and say, "Oh, how beautiful it is! Look at all these mosaics." All that stuff was plundered from thousands of churches which were deliberately ruined and destroyed as an act of policy. The biggest cathedral in Moscow was dynamited to demonstrate the power of the wonderful secular state with its glorious future of evolved human beings being nice to each other because they were bound to be nice to each other.
Can I just say
it was the pits. The whole place was a disgusting moral sink.
The French Revolution didn't come out of nowhere.
No,
it came out of a misbehaving church, a cruel, oppressive, power-mad church that had to be overthrown. And the Soviet Union, similarly, had a revolution partly because of an overmighty church. And now that the revolution has been overthrown, you've got an overmighty church asserting itself again. And people will come to regret that. They will come to find themselves living in a semi-theocracy, which will be far more oppressive than anything that the communists came up with.
There is a fundamental hostility to the whole idea of Christianity among people who style themselves as progressive, and it's partly because of the Helvetius point that if you once you cease to believe that man is created in the image of God and man is totally malleable, you can do anything. Which, of course, progressive world reformers always do want to do. They want to do anything. They think they can reinvent humanity over again, and they find the persistent insistence of the church that man is created in the image of God and there are things you cannot do to your fellow creature. That is a huge obstacle to people with vast utopian world reforming plans. That's the essence of the hostility. It's why when they come to full power, they always turn with great vigor on the church.
So you think that Christianity both has it builds social cohesion and goods, but it also restricts people who might otherwise be tempted to simply...
It's a fundamental protection of humanity against the outrages of utopians.
I mean, all of this is sort of quite apocalyptic stuff that Peter's painting here. If we kind of let secularism have free reign, if you like, once these places that he says historically have thrown off the shackles of religion, well, look what happened.
Yeah, but they replaced it with something that was intrinsically bad, of communism or Nazism or something came along and saw religion as a sort of threat to its own power, so they dispensed with it. That's what dictators
do. They purposefully crushed it, and that's not what you're saying.
They had a great deal of sympathy for this from peaceful, nice, herbivore English social reformers such as the Webbs, who wrote an admiring book about it in 1938, 1939, Soviet Russia and New Civilization. They believed this was what they themselves sympathized with. It's fundamentally the same thing. The difference between them and the Bolsheviks is the Bolsheviks were open about their homicidal violence and their willingness to destroy. These people, they destroy by salami slice, piece by piece, little by little, but in the end their target is the same.
I mean, you're being accused here, Terry, of this sort of death by 1,000 cuts, that really your ultimate aim is to extinguish religion.
No.
I mean, let me ask you, though, at a personal level, would you like to see Christianity, in the end, wither and die in this country?
No, not necessarily. I want Christianity to do whatever Christianity is going to do.
Okay.
And I want Islam not to do what it wants to do.
Okay, so you do at least put Christianity as a more positive influence on society than Islam? Is that fair to say?
As it stands at the moment, there are definite threats that are very serious from Islam, and we all know that. But I don't think Christianity is going to restrain that. It will have no impact whatsoever. But this idea that we should reinforce Christianity and make sure that everybody's a good God-fearing person will end up in the end with yet another religious conflict. We don't need any more religious conflicts. We need people to be able to live together under one law that is the same for everybody. The Americans do it. The French do it. Their civilizations have not collapsed. I think we could do it too.
I mean, the American example, it could be said that what is being proposed by this commission is effectively bringing us closer to what Americans have enjoyed under their constitution for hundreds of years.
This is such a misunderstanding. The American objection to an established church was an objection by a fundamentally Christian people. strongly Calvinist evangelical people who'd gone to America precisely to set up a society which was of that kind, against the establishment of Episcopalian Anglicanism, which they regarded as inimical to them anyway. It wasn't a desire not to have a religion supported by the state. The Christian religion, suffused the whole making of the United States. It was to be a city upon a hill guided by Christian principle. So to mistake the anti-establishment clauses in the American Constitution or the Constitution of Virginia as an anti-Christian attempt to drive Christianity out of the state is absurd. America has always been, from its inception, a profoundly Christian society, not one with an established church, but Christian nonetheless. French secularism is a wholly different thing, which we could spend hours discussing. And they don't even begin to compare. Speak of the two things in the same breath is to make a mistake.
Yeah, I agree with that. The American form of secularism is there to protect religion, but not to allow it to take over the state.
Right.
But the French.
So you favour that form as opposed to the French form
No,
of
I would
secularism?
prefer the French secularism, which I think is far safer for everybody in the modern world. It's an inspired idea that will help people from different religions to live together. I mean, the problem in America is going to be quite soon that they will have huge numbers of people from another religion living there who will not respect the constitutional separation of religion and politics. And you will get more religious conflict.
We're going to take a quick break and we'll finish this conversation in a moment's time. We're talking about whether Britain's Christian heritage is history or whether we should hang on to it and see the value that it has played and should continue to play in the principles, values and structures that we've enjoyed in the UK. But wherever you're listening in the world, I'd be interested in your perspective on this. Again, if you want to get in touch, it's the email address unbelievable@premier.org.uk. And we'll conclude today's programme on the other side of a very short break. Hello, welcome to the third and final part of this week's Unbelievable with me, Justin Brierley. Back to the final part of our discussion between Peter Hitchens and Terry Sanderson in a moment as we continue this debate on whether Britain has finally abandoned its Christian heritage. Later on today, 4 till 5, you can hear Anne and Gavin Calver. They're the theme leaders at the coming Spring Harvest in 2016. They're also the subject of our latest magazine at Premier Christianity. So if you want to get a free copy of that and read the interview with Anne and Gavin Calver, then why not go to premierchristianity.com and add /free sample if you'd like to be sent a free sample copy. That's available to people in the UK. There's also loads of other interviews, features, reviews, blogs and so on at the Premier Christianity website. In fact, we've put up a review of the new Star Wars film. I'm going to be seeing it next week. I don't know if you've perhaps already seen it. What's funny is that when I've been telling people about this review that we put up literally hours after the first screening went out, lots of people are saying, I'm not going to read it because they don't want any spoilers. So ironic, isn't it, that you try and get something up, absolutely on the dot and then people don't want to read it because they don't want any spoilers. Anyway, if you have seen it and you're happy to read a review, which also pulls out some of the spiritual dimension of the film, then why not go to the blog again? That's premierchristianity.com/blog, and you can, as I say, get hold of a free sample copy of the mag, which has Star Wars as the overall theme this month. Next week on Unbelievable, it's a Christmas special of the programme, so you can hear me in conversation with people like Colin Nichol. He's the author of a new book, The Great Christ Comet. He's going to be talking about his theory on the truth behind the Star of Bethlehem. Phil Vischer joins me. He's the creator of the VeggieTales animated cartoons and What's in the Bible, Buck Denver, and much more. He's a great, fun guy. He hosts his own podcast out in the USA. I've been on it once or twice. I thought it was time he came on this one. So he's going to be joining me for a Christmas special, along with Ruth Jackson, who is the Deputy Editor of Premier Children's Work and Youth Work magazines. She's going to be bringing her thoughts on Christmas and all things related to Santa Claus, for instance. That'll be under discussion as well in the programme. And our honorary skeptic on next week's programme is Nick Pandolfi. He's a radio presenter. He's an agnostic as far as faith is concerned, but he still loves going to church at Christmas, singing the Christmas carols and, watching the nativity play. We're going to be asking, isn't that a bit hypocritical, Nick? And he'll be defending himself. Or maybe he won't. We'll see. But it's going to be a fun edition, actually, of the programme next week because I've got lots of guests coming on. Even a brief appearance from David Suchet, who is best known as the actor behind Poirot on our TV sets. And he'll be talking about his first Christmas as a Christian, because he was an adult convert to faith. So lots to look forward to on that special Christmas edition of the programme at the same time next week between 2:30 and 4. And, of course, online at premierchristianradio.com/unbelievable.
You're listening to Unbelievable on Premier Christian Radio.
It's been a really interesting discussion today on Britain's Christian heritage. Some people say that the new Commission on Religion and Public Life is putting it all into, if you like, threat. It's threatening, really, the foundations of the society that this country's been built on. Others say their recommendations don't go far enough. Terry Sanderson says that of the National Secular Society, and we've been debating both the conclusions of this report and whether Christianity has played a significant role in the establishment of the country we live in, and whether it should continue to do so. It should be the founding principles upon which this country is based. Peter Hitchens certainly arguing for that. Peter's column on the Mail on Sunday responded to the report recently. And let's just start to wrap things up, gentlemen. I don't know, sort of. Obviously, we're not going to get an agreement between you in the course of today's show. Fundamentally, Peter, your overall feeling, I think, seems to be that abandoning, if you like, Christian heritage ideals and ethos in this country is an untested experiment, although you'd say actually you've seen it happen elsewhere and you've seen the results and you don't like them.
It's been tested in other countries where the relationship of Christianity to the society has been different, but nonetheless where people have thought they could manage without it and indeed deliberately sought to manage without it. I don't think it's been a great success. There is this fundamental thing. What has departed from us is this, and is departing very rapidly. A number of people to whom the stories such as the ones I mentioned, the Good Samaritan, the Prodigal Son, the precepts of the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, were known, is going to be a different sort of society from one where people don't know these things, where there is no force in their minds that they've read and understood from their childhood up of how to turn the hearts of the disobedient to the wisdom of the just and to guide our feet into the way of peace, both of which, as you will know, are biblical quotations and things which people were taught to desire and to know as good throughout their childhood and education, and which they knew by heart, and which were part of their lives and part of their thought. When that ceases to be part of the way people think, they behave differently. They're just haunted by a small episode I once saw in the French concession in Shanghai. Walking along the street of small shops and market stalls, and I espied in the street, sitting there, a small mouse, a rather pretty sort of almost Disney mouse with pink ears and a tail. And I thought, how sweet, in that English way that I have. And a Chinese stallholder, a few feet away from me, who was spotted at exactly the same time, walked over and kicked it to death. And I thought, this is a different world in which I find myself. People feel and think differently from me, and no doubt he had his reasons for doing it. But it was very striking, and I thought of all the other things, all the other many ways in which his upbringing, his ideas about life were different from mine. And I've thought ever since it was an interesting illustration of how you can stand next to somebody, you have the same number of limbs, you look roughly the same, and you dress roughly the same, but you are fundamentally and hugely different. And I thought my culture and his culture are totally different, and one of the reasons for that is the Christian religion in which I was brought up and he wasn't.
I've heard it said also, Terry, some people have said the danger of taking away the Christian heritage and the values and those things that Peter's just mentioned that people sort of aimed to strive toward, even if they never met fully those aims. The danger is that you replace it with something where there's really no type of morality that people are being asked to live their lives by. Is that a fair representation of what would happen?
I'm not really making the case for doing away with Christianity. I don't think that...
But you're making the case for doing away with the sort of, I don't know, the idea that Christianity can give us a moral framework within which we live.
I'm trying to be pragmatic in accepting that many people are turning away from religion of any kind. And what do we do? How do we deal with that? Peter seems to want to force people back into religion in some way, to inculcate it into them in a way that is forceful at school. And I think
I think I must reject that word force.
Well, how would you do it?
Well, parents have always been entitled to withdraw their children from religious education, and I would support that. But
well,
I think that that they should be entitled to withdraw, not that they should not be offered it in the first place.
Yeah, but then once you start with we're all going to be Christians whether we like it or not.
Well, that's exactly what I said. That I wasn't. That I
well,
wouldn't say.
that,
so
that's
don't characterise what I said
that's
as that,
what it
because
sounded
it's not,
like to me.
It's not true.
And
because either you weren't listening or you willfully wished to misrepresent it. I can't decide which, but
just
one or the other. It isn't what I think. It's not what I say. It's not what I want.
Using one of your own tactics, but anyway, the way that I see it is that if you really try to inculcate religion in schools, you really press it, which is what's happening in Islamic schools in this country at the moment. Because the parents want it. They want their children to have this strong morality that they think Islam brings to them. And you end up with the Trojan horse scenario where religion just gets out of control. And
I mean, I don't think you're saying, Peter, at that level, all religion is good. All religion is equally welcome to have its influence on British society.
My understanding of it, the accusations about Trojan horse schools have been levelled against schools which are not openly Islamic.
But they were in all but name.
Well, exactly. But if you had Islamic schools following a law which allowed them to do this, then perhaps you might be able to prevent that more effectively than if you just attempt to prevent it altogether. I don't think Islam is going to be content in this country with an education system which actively tries to prevent children from growing up as Muslim. The parents won't put up with it. But we have to be clear about this. And I have to say it again. If you have religious education in schools, people ought to be able to withdraw from it, and there have to be rules about how it's conducted. And that seems to me to be absolutely right. One of the astonishing aspects of all this to me is that the atheists, the secularists, and the humanists have attacked Christianity for many, many years so successfully that they've now cleared a space and left it swept and garnished for Islam to become quite probably the most powerful religion in this country, a prospect of which they now begin to panic, but they don't actually have any answer to it.
Yeah, atheists, humanists, and secularists, they're completely different things, and I think that
Venn diagram often coincides.
Yeah, well, there are an awful lot of secularists who are actually Christian who understand that if you allow a theocracy to develop, you get something you don't want. And I think it's very important to accept that there are an awful lot of people in this country who do not want their children to be educated in religious schools. And an awful lot of Christians who approach the National Secular Society and saying, we're having people coming into our school who are a bit wild, who are a bit extreme, and nobody told us about it. They just brought them in. And this is happening more and more. And I think that once you start saying religious education is so important that we've got to have more and more and more of it, then education becomes unbalanced. And I think people don't want it. They shouldn't have to have it. And I think Peter's idea of sort of reinforcing religion in schools to the point where people can't escape it and end up being Christians because of it.
How many times do I have to say? I think people should be able to opt out of it. Of course they can escape it. Also, I have to say I'm reduced to helpless laughter by the idea of Archbishop Rowan Williams as a theocracy.
This was the way, just to finish off, that Paul Vallely concluded his take on this. He said, the vision of the report that offers is of a lowest common denominator society that hollows out religion. In contrast, society needs a highest common factor vision that draws out the best of all faith rather than seeks to neuter them with an impoverished secularism. I think the concern there seems to be, what are you replacing it? Which was Peter's original question. What are you replacing that vision, that Christian vision of morality, whether or not you agreed with all aspects of it?
Not trying to replace it with anything.
Right.
All I'm saying is that we should have a political system that includes everybody.
Yeah.
And secularism provides the framework for that. It is not a theology. It's not seeking to interfere with religion. All it's saying is that religion should not interfere with the state. That's all.
So you have at the end of the street, you have a beautiful building which is disused. There it stands. It's disused and it sits there, and you want to knock it down.
No, I
But
don't.
you won't say what you're going to put in its place.
No, I'm not knocking
I wonder
down.
why
The
not.
Church of England is knocking them down, turning them into carpet warehouses and blocks of flats because nobody wants to go to them.
You're missing the point of my metaphor. You want to get rid of something, but you won't say what you want to put in its place.
I don't want to get rid of anything. What I want to put in place is a structure that allows everybody to be who they are.
We're going to leave it there.
What if they turn out not to be very nice?
And we'll leave it there then. Thank you very much both for being with me, Peter Hitchens and Terry Sanderson. Peter, if people want to find your blog, that's very easy to find. They just type it into Google and
Peter Hitchens' blog should find it without too much.
Should find
as long as you spell it right.
National Secular Society can be found at secularism.org.
Just put National Secular Society into the
that'll
Google
get you
and
there.
you'll get there.
Google is your friend. And thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with me on the programme today. Really spirited discussion between you both. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for taking part today.
Okay.
All the very best.
Unbelievable with Justin Brierley.